Hello and welcome to all. Here are the 10 most surprising and unusual secrets of prisoners. You can ask any prisoner, but they will all tell you the same thing. One of the favorite pastimes in prison is without a doubt making pruno. You certainly don't know what it is, unless you've spent a long time in the shade, or you're a big fan of penitentiary movies, of course. But don't worry, because we're going to enlighten you and we're going to tell you everything about pruno, the prisoner's nectar. Pruno is in fact nothing less than an alcoholic drink, obtained in an artisanal way by the prisoners, by fermenting fruits with sugar and crushed bread. The original recipe for this beverage was given to the prisoners by Jarvis J. Masters, a California death row inmate who'd been charged with the murder of a prison guard. The distillation of this drink is done with vulgar plastic bags and other used socks, and the final result will be stored in the toilet bowl in order not to be seized during the controls of the cells. It's a very unpleasant mixture, which is still around 12 degrees, but whose taste is so disgusting that it will make you never want to drink again. In prison, you really have to know how to fight to survive. And we have to tell you that no holds are barred. So we might as well warn you that the prisoners are extremely dangerous, and when a fight breaks out, the result is often fatal. And for good reason. These hardened criminals have had to learn to defend themselves within the walls of the prisons, even without their firearms, which are, of course, completely inaccessible to them, except perhaps in some South American prisons, where there is real chaos. The prisoners, who are deprived of almost any metal object during their stay in prison, had to be very ingenious to be able to make their own weapons. You may already know the toothbrush, since it has become a cliché thanks to Hollywood movies, but there is in fact a whole arsenal of weapons, the most deadly, but also the most unusual. Prisoners are masters of salvaging and misusing weapons, like this surprising pair of nunchucks, made from the pillars of a chair and some sheets rolled up together. The talents of the prisoners don't stop there. As you can see here, a small selection of the instruments of death that they are able to make with the means at hand. An improvised shotgun made from bedposts, a real crossbow made from aluminum and cotton stems, or an authentic Klingon knife made from toilet paper rolls. Everything is good to make you suffer. So a little advice: if you are ever condemned to rot in a cell for some time, don't forget your toothbrush, nor your tube of toothpaste for that matter, because it could literally save your life. To communicate with each other, prisoners use a variety of surprising means and techniques to escape the surveillance and control of their captors. Even among themselves, the prisoners adopt a slang that the uninformed could not utter a single word of, and which is consciously used to signify membership in a gang or an ethnic racial group. Mirrors and other reflective objects are also frequently used by these hardened villains, as they use them as a kind of periscope to be able to see outside their cells. But in some prisons, characterized by a lack of means and chaos, prisoners can easily have access to much more elaborate and modern means of communication. In Brazil, for example, where prison overcrowding is at an all-time high, it is not uncommon for prisoners to have old cell phones or even the latest smartphones. These prisoners thwart the security controls of the guards, who scan everything that enters the prison, by having their phones delivered directly by air. No, they don't use drones as you might have thought at first, but a much more archaic and certainly more biological means, since they are nothing more or less than carrier pigeons. A small bag is attached to the neck of the poor bird, containing a small phone and its battery, and that's it. All that's left to do is to wait for the feathered letter carrier quietly in his cell. The greatest ordeal for a prisoner is to be deprived of female company, because the prison is not the school, and the mixed cells, it does not exist. It should not dream either. Most hardened prisoners know how hard it is to resist such great solitude, which explains why the walls of their cells are so often covered with posters of naked women. But if almost all the prisoners have to be satisfied with images of pinups, the occupants of a penitentiary in Miami, Florida, wanted to enjoy a show, let's say, in real size. They thus called upon the services of an agency of professional strippers and had to show themselves very astute to make them return at home. These last ones are indeed in the prison disguised as jurists, undercover to bring advice of legal order to their customers. One can imagine that these advices must have been really beneficial, since this little trick will last for some time, in full view of the director and the prison guards, who preferred to let it happen rather than to intervene. And of course, they were able to get their hands on it. The American prison system is considered one of the most severe and repressive in the world. And even high-profile criminals like Pablo Escobar or El Chapo were terrified of ending their days in a prison in Missouri or Alabama. And with an organization and discipline worthy of the Army, as well as extremely severe and strict isolation measures, we can only understand them. The American prisoners have always had to face an American justice system that was vengeful and expeditious, and that had to be implacable to try to subdue the Wild West and impose civilization on it in spite of everything. Prison sentences are certainly no laughing matter in the United States, and the prisoners have had to be very clever in order to make their ordeal a little more bearable. Cigarette smuggling is certainly one of the most popular hobbies for convicts, and tobacco is considered a real bargaining chip in prison. But in the prisons of Texas, one of the most severe states for outlaws, even this small pleasure is strongly prohibited, and the unfortunate ones in orange uniforms have to redouble their cunning to try to get past all these terrible restrictions. Thus, in 1938, the poor residents of a Texas prison complex set up an elaborate system, allowing them to sneak their cigarettes in and out of sight of the guards. Their ingenious system relied on cockroaches. Yes, you heard me right. Cockroaches. Those disgusting little bugs. The prisoners managed to tame these nocturnal and all-purpose insects and hung the cigarettes on their wings before releasing them toward the cells of their companions. They could thus quietly pass cigarettes between them without any guard ever being able to surprise them. Prisons and other detention centers are not really luxury palaces, and it must be said that we would have been revolted if they were. Nowadays, prisons are equipped with the most basic amenities to guarantee a good life hygiene to their occupants, but nothing more. So don't expect to have air conditioning or Wi-Fi in your cell, since your stay is supposed to be a punishment above all, and not a summer camp. And if prisons are literally freezing in the winter, in the summer, they turn into real furnaces, where temperatures can quickly rise to the point of being unbearable. So, if they don't have the luxury of fans, the inmates often use grandma's tricks to cool down a bit during the heat wave. Some prisoners do not hesitate to pour water out of the sink in order to wet the floor and try to create coolness. Other stratagems are also used, such as turning over a table, covering it with plastic film, and filling it with water to make a mini swimming pool. All means are good to fight against the heat, and some inmates even cover the window of their cells with a wet sheet, thus taking advantage of a rather effective air conditioning, and which has the merit of being completely free. In the United States, when you are sentenced to prison, you are not only deprived of your freedom, but you are also very often completely ruined financially. Indeed, the incarcerated persons must also pay heavy fines to the state, without forgetting the judicial expenses and the fees of their lawyers, which constitutes a very expensive bill in the end. Prisoners are almost broke the moment they enter their cells, and they will come out just as broke in a few years when they have served their full sentences. Worse still, these poor prisoners will only get out of their jails to face a very heavy debt, which obviously makes them fall back into crime, in a kind of vicious circle that keeps repeating itself. In women's prisons, too, living conditions are characterized by violence and precariousness, and women prisoners often have to endure a real ordeal throughout the duration of their sentence. In some penitentiaries, women prisoners are deprived of everything, including the most basic commodities such as sanitary napkins or other periodical tampons. The poor prisoners are thus reduced to an extreme humiliation when they have their period, but they cannot find this precious product. So precious, in fact, that it has become an authentic currency of exchange, with which one can literally buy coffee, snacks, or even cigarettes. Incredible luxury product. The sanitary tampon can even be trafficked by the unscrupulous prison guards, who can then make a maximum of money. All prison films talk about gangs and their importance in the prison system. Even though the warden and his guards are ultimately in charge, it is clear that the gangs are in control. Every aspect of a prisoner's life is governed by the sacred laws of the gang to which he belongs, and any breach of the internal rules will be severely punished. Prisoners are affiliated with the gang according to their ethnicity, which means that racism is extremely exaggerated within the prison populations, and racial crimes are legion. Members of these powerful gangs spend their time killing each other in deadly prison yard brawls or in deadly shower room assaults with improvised but very effective weapons. The scariest part is that these gangs have a very long reach, and their sprawling activities extend outside the prison walls. This often leaves no way out for the ex-prisoners, who once released will have to remain loyal to the gang or else suffer the most terrible consequences. And as always on your beloved YouTube channel, we have saved the best for last, with this sequence that comes to us from El Salvador of Central America state, considered as one of the most dangerous countries on the planet. El Salvador is indeed the sad holder of the first place in the ranking of countries by homicide rate, and every year, thousands of murders and bloody robberies are to be deplored. But in Salvadorian prisons, gangs are even more violent and cruel, and no one can really escape this violence, not even renowned journalists. This is the case of the French-Spanish reporter Christian Poveda, who had the misfortune to want to do a report on the gangs of El Salvador. The gang leaders did not appreciate the success of this documentary film and did not like to have so many spotlights on them and their illicit activities. So they decided to send sicarios to finish off the poor journalist and silence him forever. Now tell us in the comments what you think about these 10 completely unusual secrets of prisoners and detainees around the world. Don't forget to subscribe and click here to watch another of our videos.